I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Please sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com for updates on podcast guests and lots of live events. Today's podcast has been sponsored by Libro.fm audiobooks. Libro, Libro.fm, lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 150,000 audiobooks, including New York Times bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers around the country. With Libro FM, you'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, but you'll be part of a much different story, one that supports community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out the recommendations and curated lists from people like me who know books best, and also from local booksellers. You can go on Libro.fm playlists and look at the Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books playlist and go from there. If you enter code ZIBBY, Z-I-B-B-Y, at checkout, you'll get 3 audiobooks for the price of 1. So please check it out, Z-I-B-B-Y, 3 audiobooks for the price of 1. I'm so excited to be here today with Laura Zigman, who's the author of Animal Husbandry, Dating Big Bird, Piece of Work, Her, and her latest novel, Separation Anxiety. She has been a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and HuffPost. Her novel, Animal Husbandry, was made into the movie Someone Like You with Ashley Judd and Hugh Jackman. She produced a popular online series of animated videos called Annoying Conversations and was the recipient of a Yaddo residency. She currently lives with her husband, son, and dog. So welcome, Laura. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
So we were just talking a while ago, a year ago, I read the news that Laura's book, Separation Anxiety, had been picked up for a book deal in Publishers Marketplace. And I was doing this very short-lived video called The Highlights, where I was talking about all the really cool things in the book industry for the week, which I ran out of time to do. Anyway, I mentioned Laura's book deal in the video and posted it, and she wrote me back right away, which was so cool. And now here we are, and the book is coming out, and it's just so exciting.
It's so exciting because that was my first time having anything to do with a book in, 14 or 15 years. And it was my first thing on social media because back when my last book was published, Facebook wasn't even out. Twitter wasn't out. It was MySpace. So it was really exciting to see something on Instagram.
I'm glad I've ushered you
I dated myself right away.
I know, I was going to say.
So sad. Maybe I shouldn't have.
No, don't be silly. Well, anyway, I'm pleased I could bring you into the modern era, but now you're just crushing it all over. So anyway, so Separation Anxiety, what inspired you to write this book and what is it about?
Separation Anxiety is about a couple who can't really afford to get divorced. And so they have to live together and stay in the same house. They live in separate parts of the house because the cover for their newly teenage son is that, one of them snores. Of course, it's Judy who snores, but she blames that it's Gary who snores. But he sleeps in the basement in a spare bedroom. And it's also about Judy, who has gotten to a point in her life at 50 where a lot of us get at that age where loss seems to be the prevalent thing, where, she's lost both of her parents and her career has gone downhill and she can't seem to kind of get things going. And, obviously her marriage is, challenging. And her son is now a teenager who becomes just a typical kind of quiet, secretive kid that she can no longer, snuggle. And so in that emotional space, she one day looks at the dog and decides to start to wear the dog in an old baby sling that she never even wore her son in. But now she was cleaning out the basement to try to declutter and suddenly finds the sling and thinks, oh boy, I'm going to put the dog in there. And that's her form of self-comfort.
Did you do that?
No. So this is where fiction comes in. So my fiction is, I call it semi-autobiographical fiction, but it's always based on things that I'm going through or that friends of mine are going through. And so I had gotten a dog late in life, 11 years ago. I didn't grow up with animals, pets. My family was allergic. So when we got a dog 11 years ago, I just, like the lights went on. I finally understood what it meant to have that kind of support, not actually a support dog for me, but it really became one. So even though I never actually wore my dog in a sling, I feel like I wore my dog because my dog, whose name is Lady, was with me during a lot of really, really difficult times when both my parents got ill. I had my dog with me at the hospital or the treatments or whatever. And in all phases of my life since then, which, are challenging in different ways. Like the dog is just a huge part of it. So again, I never actually wore it, but now I see that there are slings. You can buy dog slings. Margaret Cho wears her dog in a sling. She has a Chihuahua, I think. So she is on the red carpet with her dog in an actual dog sling. They make them.
You need to brand them. You need to make your own.
Next year.
Next year. Yeah, that's your brand
you can
extension.
Help me with that.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's. But when I wrote this, I didn't know they were dog slings. Like I just kind of came up with it because I thought, that would be so nice to carry my dog around. Actually, carry her with me.
There's something nice about having something like pressed up against your heart.
Yeah. Like a baby.
Yeah, like
not
a baby
anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's why people are like, I can't wait to be a grandmother just to hold a baby again.
I know. It's very comforting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked actually at a new baby unit at Mount Sinai Hospital when I was in high school, and I volunteered there like once a week every afternoon. I got to just hold the babies. I know.
So cute.
And it's like my dream. Yeah, that was. I love that. There was this one Down syndrome baby who got abandoned at the hospital, so I formed this whole attachment. But anyway, so I can relate to that feeling of wanting the dog next to you. Yeah. And by the way, when I was reading this, I was in this like very posh Beverly Hills hair salon, actually getting my highlights done. So it's all coming full circle.
And they're beautiful.
Literally like 4 women came up to me and said, "Is that really a dog in that sling? Is that you? Tell me about this book." So anyway, great cover.
I love it too.
It's funny you said this book is about a couple that can't afford to get divorced, which obviously is one of the main plot lines. Yeah. But it's also about the separation anxiety of a child growing up, which I feel like to me is super relevant. I have 2 12-and-a-half-year-olds.
Yeah.
I was hoping I could just read this passage, which got to me, and then you can talk about it. I'm 50 when I head down to the basement. My son is 13. He no longer wears matching pajamas or explains the virtues of buttermilk Eggo waffles compared to home style, or holds my hand when we cross the street or walk through a supermarket. He no longer begs for Legos, pulling me into the store at the mall, pointing at the boxes, jewels on the shelves, gifts waiting to begin. It's hard for me to believe those moments ever happened, that I was ever in the middle of all that love and time and possibility, and that now I'm not. I'm like about to cry. Life eventually takes away everyone and everything we love and leaves us bereft. Is that its sad lesson? Oh, I mean, like, how can you read this passage and not want to cry? Tell me about writing this passage and the feelings behind it.
I started writing this about 4 years ago, and it was a tough time as I hadn't been writing in a long time. I had a massive case of writer's block for years and years. And so I was really out of the game, out of the business. I saw all my friends were publishing, and I was happy for them. And I really, finally got back and decided to really, in between other things I was doing to earn a living, to try to write this novel. And I had no interest really in writing just a really light, fluffy book. Especially once politics changed, once I was in actually writing it. I mean, it took me 3 or 4 years to write. The world took on a really kind of deeper, more serious tone. And I wanted to be real and talk about what it feels like to be in your 50s, with a marriage. I mean, all of us, if you're married, most people have challenging marriages, whether they admit it or not, or whether they resolve them or not and stay together. Most people, if you're married, you have a challenging situation, and if you have kids, they grow up, and that's hard. Of course, it's not as hard as people who actually lose their kids, but you do lose that version of your child when they turn into a teenager. As you're used to sort of like you go in their room at night and you say goodnight and they tell you everything. It's just like they talk and they talk and they talk. And every single thing they're thinking about. What they like, what games they want to do. And suddenly they stop talking, especially boys. They're socialized. And you can raise them however you think, to prevent that. But it's just a stage. And my son is now 19, and we talk a lot now, but I mean, it was like,
so
there was
come back
there's a period. Oh yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky. And most kids I know, friends of mine whose kids, they go through that phase and then they come back, but it's really hard when you're facing it. It's such an abrupt, it's like all of a sudden this wall comes down and it's really sad, to have that, because you miss that real connection, that opaque feeling.
You wrote another passage, and then I'll stop making myself cry here. Every day I try to square the fact that I don't know, can't know, will never know everything crossing his mind the minute it crosses it the way I used to, because he used to tell me and doesn't anymore. Sometimes even the dog isn't enough to keep those molecules from coming apart.
Yeah, just, that same feeling of like, it's just a change. And I think when you get to a certain point in your life, and some people have a lot of loss in their through. I had friends who lost parents and friends really early on, so it's not necessarily that it happens in my phase, but a lot more friends die, and a lot your family starts. I mean, really, there are funny parts in the book, but
I know I'm making it sound maudlin and depressing, but it's a great.
It is like it's real, and I think that that's when friends started to get sick, and my parents, all that stuff. So it is. Those seemingly smaller things like being able to go into your kid's bedroom and have them blab. And when that stops, it's like, I can't take it. I'm going to put the dog in a sling,
So can we back up and go more into your life a little more, and then we can come back to the book. So you wrote these amazing books many years ago.
Thank you.
How did that all happen? Why was there a big break? Yeah. Like, what was it like being so successful then? And then what is it that happened? I know you said your parents passed away, but that made this last decade so painful for you.
So I had kind of a weird trajectory. I worked in book publishing in New York for 10 years. My last job was at Knopf, and I was a book publicist. That's why I was early today.
Thank you.
Always early. But so I did that for 10 years, and I was always writing in my spare time, of course, which there really wasn't because my job was very time consuming. And then at a certain point after 10 years, I moved to Washington because I was tired of New York. I got a job at the Smithsonian. I was home at 5:15 every day because, government. And I ended up going back to a novel I had written a draft of, and I redid it, and that fall I sent it to an agent, and I got really lucky. It was sold in the States. It was sold in about 25 countries. It sold to the movies. I had one of those experiences where I was like very quickly able to quit my day job. It was fantastic. And
that was which book? That was
Animal Husbandry.
Yeah.
And so that really started my career, and I had 3 more novels published. 2 of those other ones were optioned. My 3rd novel was optioned by Julia Roberts, and my 4th novel was optioned by Tom Hanks for Nia Vardalos for My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And because Hollywood is Hollywood, those things, for various reasons didn't happen. And then we moved to Boston. I had met my husband in D.C. We moved to Boston. We had a son. We ended up buying a house. I'm from Boston. We ended up buying a house accidentally, like a mile from my parents, which I never wanted to move home. It was sort of one of those weird, Freud says there are no accidents. So it clearly wasn't an accident. We ended up living in my hometown, which was probably a bad thing. So that started a kind of regression that probably shouldn't have been living like right there. But it was nice. My son was little. My parents were around. They would babysit. I could write, that kind of thing. But my career started to have little, things would go wrong or things wouldn't happen. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then my parents got sick. And so it was and what you don't realize is you sort of think like, I'm just going to crank out a book every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. And what you don't ever take into account is like, stuff's going to happen. You're going to have years where you can't write, where things are happening in your life, where people are sick, where you have to, tend to things. And, the creative process is very delicate. And there were just years where I was like, I can't write this year. And time was going by. And at a certain point, I shifted into ghostwriting. I was able to, it sort of happened, by accident, but I sort of shifted into ghostwriting. And then I really liked ghostwriting. It was a way to earn money, and it was a way to work really closely with someone and get their story. It's a really interesting process to me. It's like you clock all these hours with them and get them to tell you stuff that they've probably never told anyone, if you're lucky. And then you write their story. And there was a relief to that, where I didn't have to produce my own stuff. But then, I longed at some point to go back to my own writing. But it took a really long time. It took a long time.
And what were are you allowed to talk about what the ghostwriting things were?
Yeah, most of them are not secret. But I worked with Wendy Davis, who was the Texas state senator who filibustered in her pink sneakers. I loved her. I worked with Eddie Izzard, who's the British cross-dressing actor, on his memoir. I'm working with somebody right now, I can't say. And she's kind of a big star. And so it's like that, and other stuff that I'm not named on. But so it's really interesting to me. And I really like doing my own stuff too. So it was really nice to get back to that.
And what about writing essays or freelancing? Or was it just like you didn't want to do you didn't want to tap into any of your emotions.
I wrote a piece a couple of years ago. A friend of mine, Lisa Bonchek Adams, who a lot of people who probably listening to this podcast remember her. She died of breast cancer in 2015. And she had a huge blog. She kept in touch with a lot of people on social media. And she was quite young when she died. She was from Darien, Connecticut. So I wrote a piece about her in Salon. And that was like the first piece I'd written in ages. And I just wasn't writing. It was such a leap. I had no confidence. I hadn't done it in a really long time. And then I had worked for a tech company, a startup, and that went under. And about a year after that, I was ghostwriting a few different things, and I finally decided, with the encouragement of my good friends in Boston, especially Alice Hoffman, who said, you just really have to try. And so I ended up going on Craigslist and finding that I could rent an office by the hour. I was renting a shrink's office in Harvard Square because I couldn't afford office space. You can go to Starbucks. And so, but I wanted dedicated. So I would rent this shrink's office when she wasn't there. Sundays and part of Mondays. And even if I sat there and stared at my phone, I was like, okay, this is my dedicated time. I'm not going to ghostwrite today. I'm not going to food shop. I'm not going to this. I'm going to sit here and try to write. And luckily, over the years, I had always been doing a little bit of something. So for instance, in 2012, I had made friends with Jennifer Weiner online. And that summer she said, come to the Cape. She goes, come, I want you to get back to writing. And I wrote a screenplay, which, my agents loved, but they never sold. So I was able, when a couple of years later, when I, rented the shrink's office by the hour, to take pieces of that script, little pieces, and sort of have something to start with. So I always say when people are blocked, just whatever you do is not wasted. Even if the script didn't sell, it felt at the time waste. But it wasn't. It wasn't at all, because years later, I took pieces of that. It was a completely different story, but I was able to use pieces, and it got me going. So nothing's ever wasted.
Do you feel like writing is something that you either have a gift for or not? Can it evaporate? Because it sounds like you were worried that you weren't a good writer anymore, whereas you felt confident you were a good writer back when all the deals are happening. And do you think you can just suddenly not be a good writer anymore? Is it something elusive?
It is elusive. It's confidence. And I think someone said that to me at a certain point, and it finally clicked. They sort of said, and I think there's something in the book about it, where it was Norman Mailer or someone said, there is no such thing as writer's block. It's a crisis of confidence. Mm-hmm. And if you look around, there are books that are better than other books and books that are less good than other books. And it doesn't matter. People might think they're really good and they publish their books and they write. And I remember someone saying to me, a good friend of mine was like, just write another book. It doesn't even have to be good, And it's sort of what's really, I think, very delicate is the sense of yourself as do you have the confidence? Do you feel like you can take criticism? When you have a book out, you have to take the good with the bad. So I've had some really nice, I'm on a lot of lists for 2020. And also, I'm sure there's other stuff coming. You have to brace yourself. You have to not really believe the nice things, because then you have to really kind of shut down that part of yourself that really absorbs the negative stuff, because it can get very negative. And so that part can be very affected by the outside. And it's hard to protect yourself from that, because it's a public thing. And the flip side is you want people to read the book. And I also understand, I go on every now and then I go on Goodreads, even though my friend Julie Claim is do not go on Goodreads. And every now and then, of course, I look at Goodreads and I'm like, I get it. I'll see a review that's not so great. And I'll be like, no, I can see that. I don't like it, but I get it. I can understand or whatever. But you also don't have to really take it that serious. It's one person's opinion,
That's true.
And but it is affecting.
There are very few books that I feel like everybody likes.
Right.
Because usually what you like in a book is something that's speaking to you. And people have all their different conversations in their own heads. How could something possibly, I don't know.
And it's totally subjective.
And it's totally subjective.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, having to steel yourself. Well, hopefully not too much, because I thought this book was fantastic, as I'm sure everybody. Well, back to the book for a minute, now that I've pried into your life story. I also found it interesting in the marriage that you depict that Gary, the husband, has an anxiety disorder. And you tell it from the point of view of the wife and how she manages to live with someone with an anxiety disorder. And what the takeaway from that was. You write, I often wonder, as I do right now, if I'd known how much Gary and his anxiety might eclipse me, whether I still would have married him. If I'd known how hard things would be now, would I have made the same choice? Would he? Doesn't every married person ask themselves this question?
I think they do. I'm sure my husband asks questions about me as well, since I'm not the easiest person to live with either. But, I've known a lot of people, and certainly in my own experience, when you're dealing with a mental health situation, or emotional issues, there's a lot of sense out there. It's just like, enough. You should leave. You should leave. You should go. And if you're talking about a physical illness like cancer or some kind of physical illness, you would never tell someone who was, had an ill spouse, it's enough already. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've had a relapse, leave, Right. And it's a whole different thing when you're dealing with marriages with one person who's struggling. And I know so many people in this position, and I myself have been in this position at times. And so it's very hard, where you're trying to do the right thing for your person. And, that's not to say every marriage has to stay, you have to stay together. People split up all the time, and people live good lives after that. It's what's right for you and what's right for your situation. But there is just, you're up against a sense that, you're supposed to leave. And I thought one of the most interesting things, and I opened the book with this little quotation from Esther Perel, who has she's had TED Talks about, she's a couples counselor. She has a more elevated title than that, and she has this great podcast about, couples counseling. And one of the most interesting things that she said that I heard was, she said it used to be that there was shame when people got divorced, and now there's shame when they stay together. And there is this sense of if you're in an imperfect union, and most of us are in some fashion, there is this sense of you could find something so much better. Now, that's not to say that there are times when you really need to leave, and that's not what I'm saying. But there are times when it's really gray. And there is a sense that you have to explain yourself why you're staying. And I think Judy also feels does she want to stay? Mm-hmm. So it's complicated. Anyone who's been married knows, on both sides.
Do you think there's anything that people like Gary can do to help their spouses? There are a lot of people who have anxiety disorders or depression.
Gary just happens to smoke a lot of dope, but a lot of people are responsive when they see shrinks, and they go through different kinds of behavioral training to do things for anxiety. So it's just that in this guy's case, his go-to is the freezer, where he keeps his pot, and that's just his thing. But most people I know are more do that, but do other things too. Yeah.
Tell me a little more also about Judy's feeling of invisibility at her age, and how she walks around and feels like no one notices her. They notice the stroller, they notice the dog, or they don't really see her. I feel like there's a lot these days about how you get to a certain age and people just don't notice you anymore.
Clockwork. You're young and lovely. Wait till you get to be. I swear to God, it's like on the day you turn.
I'm not so young, but thank you. I appreciate that.
But there is a sense, everybody looks better now because, the 40 is the new 30, and there's all this pressure. You're supposed to look amazing in your 60s. But, there is an evolutionary biological imperative where, it's the male gaze, they know you're not fertile, I guess, and, in some really ambient way. And so you get to a point where you either start to sense that, or you just are exhausted by life. And then you start to wear, boxy clothes, the whole thing. And it, there's a scene in the book, but it would happen to me where I would be at Trader Joe's, and where they talk to you, everybody, you go through the line, and the guy is always oh, I love this curry, and this is the best, ice cream. And then you get to a point where even at Trader Joe's, they talk to the woman in front of you, and then they get to you, and they're just yawning. And then that was okay, wait a minute, this is, but there is a point where everything really shifts. And then there is also a piece of that where it's a relief, where you are invisible. You can walk down the street, you walk down past a construction site, nobody says anything. And that's kind of nice. In the old days, that didn't happen. You walk down past a construction site, and someone always had something to say. And now there's a relief and a bliss in being invisible. You can just dress however you want. You can wear a dog. I remember I got my hair colored one day, and by the time I was done, it was raining.
Back to the
out.
highlights. I should have this sponsored by like a
These
hair
are all
color.
the hair.
I'm gonna
But I got my the gray covered, and by the time she was done with me, it was raining out. And okay, I live in Cambridge, so it's not like New York, but nobody cares what you look like anyway. But I didn't have an umbrella. She didn't have an umbrella, so she gave me a shower cap. So I put like just a really crappy shower cap, and she was sort of like, "Are you going to walk home like that?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." So I walked all the way home with a shower cap covering my hair because it's just been blown. And I didn't care. First of all, nobody looked at me. And also, I didn't care. Now, if I were 30, I would never have done that. I would have, never have walked home with a shower cap. But that's part of this back and forth. Like you want to be seen, and then sometimes you don't want to be seen. And so you have to, it's a shift. It goes back and forth.
So now that you're back in the writing world, less than invisible in this industry, quite the opposite. Are you happy to be back? Are you like, oh, thank God I found my way back here and now I'm in my happy place and I'm writing again and I can't wait to do more stuff? Is that how you feel, or is it more complicated?
Yeah, I mean, it is more complicated. I mean, on the one hand, I'm beyond thrilled. I never thought I would finish that book. I never thought it would sell. I mean, I ended up at a great publisher, Echo. They're great. Everything's great. I have a great agent. I mean, no complaints, 0. And I'm just completely thrilled. And I'm nervous because, I haven't started another book. And the same, it's like every time you do something, you think you can't do it again. And so I just did it. And now I'm like, I can't do it again. I'll never do it again, And I know I will. But it's very hard to write a novel. And when you get to the end of one, you're just like, wow, I can't believe I did that. And then the idea of being able to start again, because it was my 5th novel, and I've written other books too. And so you just know how much work it takes. You know how many drafts. I mean, when you write the first 20 pages, you think you have it. And then you're like, nope. And you read the first 100 pages, you think you have it. It's like, nope. I used to show my husband my pages, and he used to write for The New Yorker. He's a really skilled writer and really smart reader. And he only had the best intentions. Like when he read the, different versions of this. And I remember at the beginning, he was just like, no. And I'd go back and he'd be like, no. And then finally it was like, yeah. Like it finally was on the road. But it takes a while. It takes draft after draft, and you're trying to get the voice right. And first person, third person, what's the plot? It's hard, but it's great. So I hope that I have another idea for something, and I hope that, one of these days I get started on it.
It's so funny because you would never think that you're sort of plagued by all this insecurity. I mean, it's crazy. You would just go to a bookstore and you look at people's books and you're like, wow, they're so accomplished and that's amazing. And yet after all this time, you can say, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do it.
I think it's a myth, and I think it's a myth that everybody is just people think that I'm looking around this beautiful room of yours with all these books, and there's some people more confident than others, but I think most writers and most writers who aren't published yet feel that, and it's normal. And everybody faces that. Just because you have published doesn't mean you're going to publish again. I mean, for someone who had the career I started out with to then not have anything come out for 14, 15 years, that happens. Lots of people, there's lots of people publishing right now, same thing. We're long stretches. And I find those people really interesting because
Me too.
But it's challenging. You just have to kind of push yourself each time.
And do you have I feel like you've given so much advice throughout this conversation. Any other advice to aspiring authors, people maybe starting out with their first book, aside from how hard it is, maybe more encouraging?
Yeah, I think it's just there's also I do some coaching for people in my spare time. And I think a lot of people who are aspiring think that if they don't write every day, or if they, they look at Instagram and it's hashtag I'm writing, and they're supposed to be writing every single day. And if they're not writing, that there are all these rules. And I'm just I go for years without writing. Obviously don't follow my example. But what I mean is I'll go for months without writing, and then I write a lot. And there is no right or wrong way. It's just what's right for you. And there'll be periods where you can't write. You're either busy with your family, or you're busy with other work, or you're busy, or you just can't. And there are other things you can do. You can read, you can keep a journal, you can do whatever, try to write a script. You can do all sorts of different things, even if you're unable to tap into that writer voice that you want. So I think it's just, and also just remembering that nothing is wasted. Nothing. If you're keeping a journal, you might be able to go back and use something. There might be something in there that you could start with, start a story with, or start a novel with, and that nothing is wasted. And just because you're not, you don't have pages, or you don't have a manuscript, or you're not doing it every day, just do it anyway, however you can.
Love it. Well, if anybody wants to hear more of Laura and me sitting and chatting like this, we're going to be live at the Steicker Center at Temple Emanu-El. Me too. When is it? May 5th?
Yeah.
May 5th.
I think so.
I'm sure it'll be on my website all over the place. So come see us in person. And thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Zigman.
You've been listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books with Zibby Owens. Please make sure to sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com to get more updates about episodes like these and also lots of live events. Thanks to Libro FM for sponsoring today's episode. Remember to go to Libro FM, libro.fm, to get your next audiobook, support a local bookseller, and enter code Zibby for 3 audiobooks for the price of 1. You can follow me on Instagram at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music. Thanks for listening. You could always email me at zibby@zibbyowens.com.